The story of the Yenko Camaro doesn't begin in the high towers of Detroit or the polished halls of General Motors boardrooms. It begins in a place much smaller, much more personal, a dealership in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. To most people, dealerships are places where you sign paperwork, haggle over monthly payments, and drive off in something ordinary. But to Don Yenko, his family dealership was more than a business. It was a laboratory, a workshop, and a battlefield. The late 1960s were the height of the muscle car wars. Ford had the Mustang, Chrysler had the Roadrunner and Charger. Pontiac had shocked the world with the GTO. Chevrolet had the Camaro, a strong contender, but one that still seemed to hold back its full potential. GM executives were cautious, bound by corporate rules that limited engine sizes in smaller cars. To enthusiasts, it felt like Detroit was teasing them with the promise of performance, but never delivering the whole package. But in Canonsburg, Don Yenko had a very different idea. He wasn't an executive worried about corporate liability. He wasn't an engineer tied up in endless red tape. He was a racer, a risk taker, and most importantly, a dealer who understood what car buyers truly wanted. And what they wanted more than anything was speed that scared them, speed that thrilled them, speed that Detroit was too afraid to sell. The Yenko Camaro wasn't born out of careful committee meetings or years of market research. It was born out of defiance, out of one man's belief that the Camaro could be more than what GM allowed it to be. Don Yenko looked at the rules and saw not restrictions, but opportunities. He looked at the limitations of the Camaro and thought, why not break them? So in the quiet town of Canonsburg, a revolution began. One by one, ordinary Camaros rolled into Yenko's shop. One by one, they were torn apart, rebuilt, and reborn into something Detroit wouldn't dare sell. These weren't just cars anymore. They were statements written in tire smoke and engine roar. To some, Yenko was a hero. To others, a troublemaker who poked the bear of corporate power. But to everyone who knew his name, one thing was certain: Don Yenko wasn't just selling cars. He was rewriting the rules of American muscle, and in doing so, he created one of the most legendary and feared machines of the muscle era, the Yenko Camaro, the man behind the madness, Don Yenko. To understand the Yenko Camaro, you first need to understand the man whose name it carried. Don Yenko wasn't a typical car dealer in a suit and tie, smiling behind a desk. He was a man with gasoline in his veins, a daredevil's grin on his face, and a fire for racing that never went out. Born in 1927 in Bentleyville, Pennsylvania, Don grew up surrounded by cars. His father, Frank Yenko, ran a Chevrolet dealership, and from an early age, Don knew two things: cars could make money, but more importantly, cars could make magic. Where his father saw a business, Don saw possibility. He wasn't content to just sell what Chevrolet gave him. He wanted to bend it, twist it, and make it faster. Before he became a builder of legends, Yenko was a racer. In the 1950s and 1960s, he was a fixture on the Sports Car Club of America, SCCA circuit, tearing up tracks in everything from Corvettes to customized race specials. He wasn't just dabbling either. He became a four-time national champion and even competed in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Behind the wheel, Yenko learned firsthand the delicate balance of horsepower, weight, aerodynamics, and handling. He knew the thrill of raw speed, but he also knew its dangers. Racing taught him not just how to go fast, but how to build a car that could survive the punishment of the track. That experience would shape his dealership in ways no corporate training manual ever could. Unlike executives at GM who made decisions with spreadsheets and sales forecasts, Yenko thought like a driver. He knew what customers craved because he craved it himself. Performance, adrenaline, the ability to stomp the gas pedal and feel the car come alive beneath you. By the mid-1960s, Don was experimenting with modifying Corvettes and Corvairs, selling special versions under the Yenko Stinger banner. These cars gained him a reputation as a dealer who went beyond the ordinary, a dealer who built cars the way enthusiasts wanted them, not the way the factories dictated. Customers came not just to buy cars, but to buy Yenko cars. But even those projects were just the beginning. The real storm was coming with the introduction of the Camaro in 1967. When Chevrolet released their pony car to battle the Mustang, Don Yenko saw more than just another model on his showroom floor. He saw a canvas, a starting point, a machine begging to be pushed beyond the limits GM had placed on it. Where others saw the Camaro as good enough, Yenko saw it as unfinished. He knew that under its sleek body was the potential for something monstrous, something that could rival Corvettes, crush Mustangs, and embarrass European exotics. He wasn't going to wait for Chevrolet to deliver that vision. He was going to build it himself. This mindset, part racer, part rebel, part businessman, is what made Don Yenko unique. He wasn't the most famous name in Detroit. He didn't have the corporate resources of Ford, Chrysler, or GM. But he had something those giants didn't, the courage to break the rules. And as the late 1960s muscle car wars heated up, that courage was about to change the Camaro and muscle car history forever. The birth of the Yenko Camaro. When Chevrolet unveiled the Camaro in 1967, it was positioned as the company's direct answer to the Ford Mustang. Stylish, affordable, and customizable, it was a car that could appeal to just about anyone. But to serious gearheads and to Don Yenko, it had one glaring problem: power. Chevrolet's flagship engine for the Camaro was the 396 cubic inch big blocks, a respectable motor, but one that topped out at 375 horsepower. That might have been fine for the average customer, but to someone like Yenko, it felt like Chevrolet had brought a knife to a gunfight. Across town, Ford was dropping big engines into their Mustangs, and Mopar was unleashing monsters like the Dodge Charger and Plymouth GTX. For Don Yenko, the Camaro needed something more than respectable. It needed to be fearsome. There was a catch. Corporate policy at General Motors restricted the Camaro to engines no larger than 400 cubic inches. The rule was designed to protect the Corvettes. Supremacy as GM's ultimate performance car. Executives were terrified of internal competition, and they didn't want their shiny new pony car stealing thunder from their halo. Modeled to them, the Corvette was king. To Yenko, the rule was a straitjacket. Where others shrugged and accepted the limitations, Don Yenko started plotting. He had seen firsthand how much muscle car enthusiasts lusted after bigger engines, and he knew the solution was obvious. Put Chevrolet's mighty 427 cubic inch big block into the Camaro. On paper, it was madness. It was genius. The 427 was the same engine that powered the Corvette to dominance, a brute of a motor capable of producing over 425 horsepower and mountains of torque. Dropping it into the Camaro would transform the car from a sporty cruiser into a street-legal missile. But since Chevrolet wouldn't build it, Don Yenko decided he would. Using his dealership connections, Yenko began ordering brand new Camaros and having his team swap out the factory engines for the monstrous 427s. These weren't backyard conversions done in secret garages. They were full-fledged performance packages offered through his Pennsylvania dealership, complete with badges, stripes, and warranty. Coverage buyers could walk into Yenko Chevrolet, sign the paperwork, and drive out in a Camaro that officially didn't exist in Chevrolet's catalog. The transformation wasn't just about the engine. Yenko's team upgraded suspensions, rear axles, and other components to handle the newfound power. They added distinctive stripes and badging so that the world knew this wasn't an ordinary Camaro, it was a Yenko. Each car carried its own unique flair, a symbol of rebellion wrapped in steel. By 1967 and 1968, the word was spreading. These Camaros were faster, meaner, and scarier than anything else you could buy off a showroom floor. Street racers loved them, drag strips feared them, and rival dealers envied them. They weren't just cars, they were statements. Owning a Yenko Camaro meant you were part of an underground club, a secret society of drivers who knew how to bend the rules. Chevrolet eventually noticed. In 1969, the company quietly worked with Yenko and a few other dealers under the Central Office Production Order System, a loophole originally designed for fleet sales. Through COPO, Yenko could order Camaros straight from the factory with the 427 already installed. This was the moment the Yenko Camaro evolved from dealer-modified hot rod to near-factory-built supercar. With the COPO program, the Yenko Camaro became even more legitimate, even more dangerous. Roughly 201 units were built in 1969, each one carrying the heart of a Corvette and the soul of a rebel. They weren't just rare, they were legendary. For Don Yenko, it was validation. He had proven that enthusiasts didn't just want performance, they demanded it. And when GM wouldn't provide it, he showed the world that a single determined dealer could. The birth of the Yenko Camaro wasn't just about horsepower, it was about breaking barriers, rewriting rules, and proving that passion could beat bureaucracy. It was about showing that sometimes the best cars in the world don't come from corporate boardrooms, but from the imagination of one stubborn man who refused to take no for an answer. An answer, the street legend and racing weapon. Once the Yenko Camaro hit the streets, it didn't take long for it to develop a reputation. This was no ordinary pony car. With over 425 horsepower under the hood, the 427 equipped Camaro could sprint down quarter miles with ferocity, embarrassing cars that cost twice as much. Street racers quickly discovered that a Yenko badge meant business, and many an unsuspecting driver learned the hard way when they lined up against one at a stoplight. To understand why the Yenko Camaro was so feared, you must look at its raw numbers. The 427 V8 wasn't just powerful, it was brutally efficient at delivering torque, a tidal wave of force that could light up the rear tires at will. In the right hands, a Yenko Camaro could blast through the quarter mile in the low 13 seconds, sometimes even dipping into the 12-second range with minor tuning. In the late 1960s, that was territory reserved for purpose-built drag cars. Now, thanks to Don Yenko, you could buy that kind of performance from a dealership. The Yenko Camaro wasn't just about straight-line speed. Yenko's team had gone to lengths to improve the car's overall handling and durability. Heavy-duty suspension components, upgraded rear axles, and stronger transmissions meant that the Camaro could take the punishment of both street racing and sanctioned drag strip events. In an era when most muscle cars were notorious for being fast in a straight line but clumsy, in corners the Yenko Camaro was a surprisingly well-rounded machine. On the street, it became something of a mythical creature. Car magazines ran stories about these super Camaros, often with a mix of admiration and fear. Local legends spread about certain Yenko cars that ruled highways and drag strips, undefeated, machines that seemed more like weapons than cars. To own one was to carry instant credibility. To drive one meant you were flirting with danger, both mechanical and legal. Because make no mistake, these cars were pushing the limits of what was street legal. Insurance companies hated them. Law enforcement saw them as troublemakers. In many states, the performance numbers alone made them targets for regulators, but that only added to their mystique. The Yenko Camaro wasn't meant to be tame. It was a black sheep, a muscle car that defied the establishment and dared to exist outside the lines. Yenko himself wasn't content with just selling cars. He knew that real credibility in the performance world came from the track, not just the showroom. And so, the Yenko Camaro began appearing at drag strips across the country. In the hands of skilled racers, these cars racked up impressive victories. They weren't as polished as factory-backed efforts from Chrysler or Ford, but they had raw speed and the advantage of sheer brute force. The NHRA, National Hot Rod Association, quickly took notice, and before long, Yenko Camaros were carving out their place in sanctioned drag racing. These weren't corporate, sponsored, million-dollar operations. They were grassroots racers, weekend warriors who had stumbled onto a secret weapon. And with every pass down the strip, the legend of the Yenko Camaro grew. Even beyond drag racing, the car's reputation began to ripple into pop culture. Street racing films, underground magazines, and gearhead folklore all started weaving the Yenko Camaro into the mythology of the muscle car era. It wasn't as famous as the Mustang or the Corvette, but in many ways that made it cooler. It was the insider's car, the outlaw's choice, the machine you had to know about to truly appreciate. What made it even more special was its scarcity. Unlike Mustangs, which seemed to be on every corner, or Dodge Chargers, which were mass-produced in the tens of thousands, the Yenko Camaro existed in tiny numbers. Each one was rare, and each one carried a story. For the kids who saw one rumbling down Main Street, it might as well have been a Ferrari. On the street, it was untouchable. On the strip, it was a proven weapon. And in the culture of late 1960s America, it became something more than just a car. It became a symbol of rebellion, a four-wheeled middle finger to the establishment. Don Yenko hadn't just built a faster Camaro, he had built a legend. Trouble on the horizon, insurance, regulations, and the fall. As the Yenko Camaro's reputation soared on the street and at the strip, a storm was quietly brewing. America in the late 1960s was changing. The muscle car era, once fueled by unrestrained horsepower wars, was starting to feel the pressure of forces that even Don Yenko couldn't outrace. The first warning signs came not from rival automakers, but from insurance companies. For years, they had been blindsided by the explosion of high-performance cars. Teenagers and young adults, prime muscle car buyers, were suddenly behind the wheels of 400-plus horsepower machines capable of devastating speed. Accident rates spiked, and insurance payouts climbed. The industry responded the only way it knew how, by targeting the cars themselves. By 1969, insurance companies had introduced steep surcharges for any car with an engine larger than 400 cubic inches or with performance-oriented packages. For the Yenko Camaro, with its massive 427, this was a death sentence. Buyers loved the car, but many found the cost of insuring it to be more than the monthly payment itself. Suddenly, the outlaw image of the Yenko Camaro came with a very real financial burden. At the same time, regulators were circling. The U.S. government, alarmed by rising highway fatalities and environmental concerns, began implementing safety and emissions standards that made it increasingly difficult to sell high-powered cars. New federal rules required changes in everything from crash safety to exhaust emissions. What had once been the freewheeling era of horsepower one-upmanship was quickly becoming a bureaucratic maze. For General Motors, which had reluctantly allowed the central office production order loophole to exist, the pressure became too much. Executives were never enthusiastic about cars like the Yenko Camaro. They worried about liability, about brand image, and most of all, about profit margins. Performance cars were risky ventures with small returns compared to safe, family-friendly sedans. When the insurance squeeze and regulatory oversight intensified, GM saw the perfect excuse to rein things in. For Don Yenko, this was a devastating blow. His dealership had built its name on pushing boundaries, on delivering cars that the factories wouldn't dare produce. But now the environment had shifted. Buyers were scared off by sky-high insurance premiums. Federal restrictions were neutering the performance potential of new cars, and GM itself was beginning to crack down on the very backdoor channels that had allowed the Yenko Camaro to exist in the first place. Sales reflected the shift. The 1969 Yenko Camaro had been a smash success, but by 1970, things were different. The muscle car market was shrinking, and niche builders like Yenko were hit hardest. Don tried to adapt, offering modified versions of other GM cars like the Nova and Chevelle, but the writing was on the wall. The golden age of muscle was fading fast. Adding insult to injury, the oil crisis of the early 1970s delivered a final gut punch. Gas prices skyrocketed, and suddenly buyers wanted fuel efficiency, not fire-breathing V8s. The same cars that had once symbolized freedom and rebellion were now seen as impractical dinosaurs. For many, the idea of spending money on a 427-powered Camaro seemed reckless, even irresponsible. It wasn't just economics, though. Culture itself was changing. The rebellious energy of the late 1960s gave way to the caution and disillusionment of the 1970s. The Vietnam War, political scandals, and economic uncertainty made muscle cars feel like relics of a bygone era. Enthusiasts still loved them, but the mainstream had moved on. By the mid-1970s, the Yenko name was fading. Don Yenko remained a respected figure in performance circles, and his dealership still carried influence. But the days of building outlaw supercars through GM loopholes were gone. The Camaro itself continued into a new generation, but it was softer, heavier, and saddled with emissions controls that strangled its once mighty V8s. Looking back, it's almost poetic. The Yenko Camaro burned brightly, but briefly. It was too wild, too powerful, too rebellious to last in a world that was tightening its grip on the automobile. In many ways, its downfall wasn't a failure at all, but an inevitability. Cars like the Yenko Camaro weren't meant to survive, they were meant to shake things up, to leave a mark, and to remind everyone what was possible when rules were bent and limits were ignored. And that's exactly what it did. Legacy and modern reverence. The story of the Yenko Camaro didn't end with the fading muscle car era. Its flame may have dimmed on the streets of the 1970s, but its legend never died. In the decades since, collectors, enthusiasts, and historians have kept the name alive, preserving the memory of the cars that dared to defy the rules. Today, a pristine 1969 Yenko Camaro is more than just a vehicle. It's a cultural artifact, a rolling piece of automotive history. Auction houses report jaw-dropping prices for these rare machines, often exceeding $300,000 for well-maintained examples. Each car carries a story. The buyer who drove it to glory on the drag strip, the teenager who flipped it into a legendary street race, or the Yenko dealership employee who helped build it by hand. The Yenko Camaro also influenced an entire generation of tuners and performance enthusiasts. Modern resto-mods and aftermarket specialists frequently pay homage to Yenko's designs, recreating the signature stripes, Copo 427 swaps, and suspension upgrades for a new era of enthusiasts. In many ways, Don Yenko's philosophy lives on. Never settle for what's given, always push for more. Collectors speak of the Yenko Camaro with reverence. It's not just the rarity or performance that captivates, it's the audacity behind it. A single dealer operating far from Detroit's boardrooms had the vision, the courage, and the skill to challenge a corporation and build something extraordinary. That story resonates beyond horsepower and torque. It's a tale of rebellion, ingenuity, and the pursuit of perfection against all odds. For Don Yenko himself, the legacy is simple but profound. He didn't just sell cars, he crafted legends. He showed the world that sometimes a small player with vision and determination can outperform giants, rewrite the rules, and leave an indelible mark on history. The roar of a 427 V8, the glare of signature Yenko stripes, the adrenaline of a quarter-mile sprint. These are not just mechanical experiences, they are memories, myths, and moments frozen in time. Every time someone sees a Yenko Camaro today, whether at a car show or on the open road, they are reminded that the age of outlaw muscle was real. and that one man's courage could make a car more than metal, it could make it legendary. The Yenko Camaro didn't just push performance limits, it pushed imagination, inspiring generations of enthusiasts to dream bigger, build bolder, and never accept mediocrity. Its legacy is eternal, a story of speed, rebellion, and the unstoppable force of a visionary dealer who refused to let the rules define him or his car. If you enjoyed this incredible story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more epic automotive adventures. Your support keeps these stories alive.